Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation today. This is non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions, getting a better understanding of what can and what cannot be excused in an audit assessment. My name is Joe Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of notes for our guests today. All of you are on mute. But we do want to address your questions. So we ask that you use the question portion of the dashboard. I will be addressing questions at the end of my presentation this morning. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not this presentation will be made available after we're finished. We do make our webinars available in two ways. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides, those will be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar with the voiceover or perhaps share it with a colleague, we do post all of our webinar recordings to our YouTube page. And that can be also linked on the PGR website. Just look for the link entitled Previously Recorded Webinars. Now, our topics for today, we're going to address what is meant by the term non-applicable clause. And we're going to kind of unpack the meaning of this requirement and get into where this requirement comes from, both within ISO 9001 itself and some of the more high-level requirements. We're going to have some extended discussion on a concept called outsourcing, which is very key in this discussion. We'll talk briefly about the impact of a limited scope. I'll have a couple of concluding remarks, and then we will address your questions. So for our presentation today, just bear in mind we are exploring these concepts as they are addressed in ISO 9001. Now there is an element of non-applicable clauses in some of the ISO 9001 rooted standards, such as AS 9100 or IETF 16949. This concept comes up in some of the other ISO published standards, but there are sector-specific requirements in many cases. Now, we do have webinars on many of the other standards that we offer certification for. So if you've got questions that fall outside of ISO 9001 exemptions, I may not be able to answer those questions for you today. So let's begin with what are non-applicable clauses. Now, this terminology comes from ISO 9001 section 4.3, where it states that the organization's scope, that's your scope statement, in other words, what it is that you have sought certification for, shall state the types and products and services covered, and will provide justification for any requirement of this international standard or this standard, ISO 9001, that the organization determines is not applicable to the scope of its quality management system. Now, in 4.3, it goes on to say that the scope statement has to be maintained as documented information, and that includes the details and justification for your non-applicable clauses. So this needs to be written down in some kind of traceable fashion, and then, therefore, of course, subject to audit. Now, for my presentation, I've chosen to use the innocuous term exemptions. It rolls off the tongue a little easier than non-applicable clauses. So for an exemption to be justified, it has to be something that is not part of the quality management system as defined by the scope. The scoping of your system is key in this discussion. And as I mentioned, we will be talking about a limited scope a little bit later in the presentation. So let's dig in a little bit and try to understand this a little better. So to begin with, we need to consider the high-level requirements. Now, the guidance for exemptions is vast. There's been a lot of writing on this. Some of this has come from the TC 176 committee itself. These are the folks that actually write ISO 9001. There have been publications by the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group. This is a joint cooperation between the ISO and the IAF. Obviously, there's guidance within ISO 9001 itself, both content that is auditable and content that is considered guidance. And then additionally, some of you are probably aware, there's a whole guidance standard on ISO 9001 that goes clause by clause, and that's the Technical Specification 9002. So we're going to be drawing from a lot of different areas in building our presentation today. So let's take a step back and consider kind of where all of this started. Now, the prior version of ISO 9001 was the 2008 edition of the standard. Now, shortly after that version was published, the TC 176 committee issued a couple of binding guidance documents. Now, these were 524R6 and 630R3. Now, these were guidance on application and guidance on outsourcing. Now, these two documents introduced a requirement that at the time was considered somewhat controversial. So what was so controversial? Well, the two guidance documents taken together provided a wide variety of guidance on what was meant by what at that time was referred to as permissible exclusions. But what they said, and I've got the direct quotes here, was that you could not claim conformity to ISO 9001 if you had excluded a requirement on the basis that it had been outsourced. And that was re-emphasized in both of these documents. And I've kind of highlighted the language where that was called out, particularly in 630R3, where it said that if you outsource an activity, you can't ignore it and you can't exclude it from the quality management system. So this was kind of the first clue in terms of where the committee was going with how the standard was to be understood in this area of exemptions and outsourcing. So even now, an exemption that's rooted in outsourcing is not an acceptable exemption. So in other words, if you outsource an activity to another organization, that activity still falls within your quality management system, even though it's not occurring in the building. We're going to demonstrate how that thought process has continued with the current version of the standard. So we need to address the elephant in the room, and that is design. Over the years, I've personally been involved with Perry Johnson for almost 25 years. Design was an item that at one time it was considered a very black and white issue. Either organizations had design or they didn't. And so in the past, we had clients that would claim exemption on design because designs were being provided by a parent company or a sister company. Now, those exemptions were potentially not appropriate and should not have been automatically accepted. Now, I'll be providing some justification on this a little later in the presentation. In terms of the correct situation, the correct circumstances for an exemption of design, it's going to be one of two situations. Either A, you are receiving a complete product design from your customer, ready for your shop floor, or B, you are not manufacturing products based on a product design. So maybe you've got a warehouse, a distributorship, something along those lines. Now, we will be exploring kind of a third option a little bit later in the presentation. So how can PJR audit something that isn't taking place in your building? Now, this is a response that we get not just from clients, but from auditors even. And the thing to bear in mind with this is we're not, if it's an outsourced activity, we're not auditing the actual activity. We're not gassing up the car and driving to wherever it takes place. We are auditing the outsourcing controls that you've applied to that outsourced process. So I've mentioned it a few times now. Let's officially unpack what's meant by outsourcing. Outsourcing is defined as making an arrangement where an external organization performs part of an organization's function or process. Now, it's key that we note the phrase, the organization's function or process. That means that the organization still has ownership of the function or process, even if it isn't being performed right in the facility. And this is emphasized in the note that appears right after that definition. The external organization that we mentioned is outside of the scope of the management system, but the outsourced function or process is within the scope and therefore subject to audit and therefore not something that can be excluded. That's really the key in understanding why you can't exclude something or exempt something that you've outsourced. So what gets outsourced? What are some common things that get outsourced? Well, I've provided a fairly extensive list here. Probably the most common thing that we see in our audits of average companies is outsourcing of calibration, or what you might call verification of measurement devices. Most of our clients have this to some degree. We also see, obviously, design is very common, product testing and analysis, non-conforming product disposal, etc. And each of these activities has a clause, at least a primary clause, some have multiple clauses, that are associated with that activity. And none of these would be excluded for the company that is seeking certification. So where is outsourcing discussed in ISO 9001 itself? Well, the primary clause is section 8.4.1, where it says that you need to ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. 8.4 is kind of a catch-all clause. It refers not just to traditional suppliers, but to any outside organization that is providing a good or service that helps facilitate the quality management system. Now, you may or may not be aware, there's actually an explanatory note for this in Annex A, and it's actually A8, where it explains that all forms of externally provided processes, products, and services are addressed in Section 8.4, whether through an arrangement with an associate company or outsourcing processes to an external provider. Outsourcing also gets discussed in 9002, where it indicates that external providers could include a corporate headquarters, an associate company, in addition to suppliers, and someone that you've chosen to outsource a process to. The Auditing Practices Group weighs in. They have a special document called Scope of ISO 9001, where it indicates that outsourcing is an input to the development of an organization's scope. As a reminder, when we audit an outsourced activity, we're not auditing the actual activity itself. Rather, we are confirming that appropriate controls have been established for that activity. So what kind of controls are we referring to? Well, bear in mind that ISO 9001 is very open to control protocols. So think about, how do you communicate with your outside providers? How do you provide them with your expectations? Now, the traditional methods might include things like purchase orders and contracts, but there's other ways to accomplish this. Could be done through email communication, could be done through an external provider audit, could be done through providing work instructions. The key is that you need to figure out what is appropriate for you and what is going to be effective and consistent. So let's consider a company that chooses to outsource 100% of their calibration or verification activity to a calibration provider, to a laboratory. Well, what is our auditor going to look at on audit day? Well, they're going to look at a variety of things. They might look at the contract that's been established between the company and the calibration laboratory. They would certainly look at calibration records that are issued by the calibration laboratory. They would certainly look at calibration gauge labeling being applied by the calibration laboratory. Now, please note that none of those things equivocate to a review of the actual calibration verification activity itself. And furthermore, none of the statements in section 7.1.5 from ISO 9001 would be claimed as an exemption in that scenario. Now, one thing that you may or may not be aware of, when we perform an audit and when our executive committee reviews an audit package, one of the things that we've trained our team to do is to review the organization's website. And we do this for a variety of reasons, but one of the key things that we are doing is verifying that the scope of certification that we've been told is accurate and that it's being accurately portrayed on the website. And we're also looking for any kind of evidence of design activity for an organization who has told us they do not design their products. This is something that happens more often than you might think. So if we note design on an organization's website and the organization is certified as a no design company, well, we're going to reach out and make some inquiries, and we might learn a few things. They might tell us, well, corporate provides the designs. Well, we've learned that it isn't acceptable to exclude design if you're getting your designs from your corporate office. They might tell us, well, we don't really do design, but we want to attract customers by saying that we do. Well, that's understandable as well, but that's also not an acceptable arrangement. Once in a great while, we get told that we did design our products, but all product designs are now very old, 30 to 40 years old, etc. In that situation, most of the time, we can make a special arrangement whereby you'll be treated as full design, but the audit duration will potentially be adjusted. Let's talk a little bit about exemptions rooted in a limited scope. Now, the majority of our clients intend for their entire operation to be included in their ISO 9001 certification. In other words, everything that they do, they want to have certification for. There are occasions where an organization will come to us and want to have the ISO certification be for just one particular aspect of what they do, one product line or one production area, etc. Sometimes this is for financial reasons. Sometimes there's other reasoning behind it. Where that is the case, it is possible that a portion of ISO 9001 can be exempted in that situation. And I'm going to try to give you a very specific example. Let's say that you have an organization that manufactures clothing for both industrial and commercial markets. And we'll assume leather goods for industrial and polyester for commercial. Now, you may recall that ISO 9001 talks about warranty provisions in section 855. So let's assume that this organization offers warranty returns on their polyester products, but not on their leather products. So if that company is seeking certification solely for their leather product line and there are no warranty provisions, it's possible that there may be a full or partial exemption from Section 855 in that situation. Now, if we perform an audit and we find that you are attempting to exclude something that you shouldn't be, in most circumstances, what needs to happen is for a nonconformance to be cited. Now, you do have the right to dispute a nonconformance if it's issued. We do have a procedure for that. It's our procedure Pro 10, and we actually have a separate webinar on this topic entitled Your Relationship with PJR. So if you need to dig into the dispute process, take a look at that webinar, take a look at our website and at the Pro 10. Now, some years ago, we actually rolled out a new certification option for our clients who receive some or all of their product designs from a parent or affiliate company. Now, we refer to this as full design outsourced. Now, for any company that is full design outsourced, it's going to mean a couple of key things. First of all, audit duration is potentially going to be calculated in the same manner that we do for a no design company. I'll be giving you some clarification on this in a couple of slides. Any organization that is classed as full design outsourced cannot claim an exemption from the design section, in other words, section 8.3. And also, the certificate that's issued to that client must talk about design as part of the scope. Now, when we rolled out our full design outsourced classification, we actually reached out to the ANAB to make sure that they were in agreement with us that, that this was a good option. Now, the ANAB generally indicated that they felt what we were doing was appropriate, but they emphasized that we needed to be sure that the controls that were applied to outsourced processes were going to be included in the audit process. Now, I'm actually quoting directly from our communications with ANAB at that time, where they said, first of all, that complexity, activities, and risks that are present due to outsourcing need to be controlled and confirmed. In other words, we need to audit that area. And Section 8.4 has many requirements that apply to the organization and must be confirmed when you are certifying an organization that outsources products, processes, or services. Now, ANAB went on to remind us that automatic time reductions for product design status are not always appropriate. And they said, you know, you need to capture why you've reduced audit time in all situations. So if we have a client that we're going to classify as full design outsourced, most of the time we don't automatically apply the audit time reduction because we need to get on site and we need to verify that the outsourced process controls are mature and effective and consistent. And that way we can confirm, okay, we can audit this area without needing a lot of extra audit time. So we now have 4 classification options for design status. Let's go ahead and take a look at those options. We obviously have full design. Now, if you are responsible for the design of at least one of the products you manufacture, it could be one of 100, one of 1,000. In that instance, you are full design. And all sections of Clause 8.3 are applicable. We also have no design. This is for companies that receive all designs from their customers or who otherwise do not interact with product designs. Now, Section 8.3 can be claimed as not applicable for these types of companies. Now, if you receive product designs from your parent or affiliate company, but you don't advertise or otherwise represent that you're responsible for product design. It is possible in that situation that you may qualify to be classified as no design. These are rare circumstances, and they are intensely confirmed during the audit process. We also have an option that is referred to as partial design. This is for an organization that provides technical input, review, verification, or other design services to its clients, but does not have responsibility for final design approval. Just as a note, we have relatively few clients classified in this manner. A partial design company is going to exclude some, but not all, of Section 8.3. And then finally, we have our newest option, not so new anymore, full design outsourced. And as we've explained, this is an organization that receives all or some of its product design from parent affiliate companies or subcontractors, and advertises or otherwise represents that they are responsible for product design activity. A full design outsourced company will have all portions of Section 8.3 considered applicable. PJR wants to make sure that our audit process is value added for our clients while addressing all applicable requirements. Ensuring that all exemptions are justified is an important part of this process. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We have a webinar on the Pro 3 and how to properly promote your management system certification. So if you're newly certified and you're looking for some guidance on how to advertise your certification the right way, that's a great webinar for you. I mentioned earlier our presentation, your ongoing relationship with PJR. This is an unpacking of what needs to happen when there are changes at your organization, and it is also a discussion of the disputes process. And we have a wide variety of webinars on other topics, things like stage 1 auditing, on some of the other standards that we certify to. A lot of great content. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the best way for you to do that is to visit our website at www.pjr.com. If you go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address in the space, and click subscribe, you will be automatically opted in for news updates, news on standards, news on upcoming webinars, and other helpful points of information. I do thank you for your time and attention. I hope you have found today's presentation to be helpful. As a reminder, our slides and the voiceover recording will both be accessible on the PJR website shortly after we're finished. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard and see if we have any questions today. Okay, it would appear there are no questions. I will conclude. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.